What if the warmest home on the frozen Great Plains wasn't built above the ground at all? Winter on the plains is unforgiving. The land is flat, the wind relentless, the cold, fast and deadly. Anything that stands exposed is stripped of heat within minutes. To rise above the land is to invite the storm. But the people who lived here understood something different. They learned that height attracts the wind, that cold hunts what resists it, and that the earth itself holds a quiet, stable warmth when everything above it freezes. So they didn't build against winter. They built into the ground. From a distance, their homes looked like low mounds beneath the snow, silent and nearly invisible. Yet below the frozen surface, fires burned steadily, food was protected, and families slept while blizzards passed overhead. These were not shelters born of fear. They were homes shaped by understanding. Winter on the Central Plains is not gentle. The wind never stops. It moves endlessly across open land, grinding loose snow into hard sheets and stealing heat from exposed skin in minutes. There are few trees to block its force, little stone to build with, and nowhere to hide once the storms begin. Anything that stands tall becomes a target. Anything exposed is tested. And yet, for generations, native communities lived here year-round. They did not survive by fleeing winter. They survived by understanding it. To an outsider traveling along the Missouri River, winter villages may have appeared quiet, even abandoned. There were no tall walls rising against the wind, no chimneys pouring smoke into the sky. Only low, rounded shapes scattered across the frozen ground, partially buried beneath drifting snow. Smoke lifted slowly and thinly, barely visible against the pale winter air. It was easy to mistake this stillness for weakness. But beneath the frozen surface, something deliberate was happening. Earth lodges were not makeshift shelters thrown together in desperation. They were carefully designed homes, refined through generations of lived experience. Every element reflected an intimate knowledge of how winter behaves on the plains. The cold was not challenged head-on. The wind was not resisted. The land was not defied. Instead, earth and snow became insulation rather than obstacles. Heat was conserved, not wasted. Air was guided, not forced. While winter raged above the plains, life below the surface remained steady, warm, and ordered. These were not temporary refuges, meant to endure a single storm. They were winter machines, homes built to work with winter, not against it. A winter day often began before sunrise. Not because of urgency, but because light mattered. The lodge door faced east by intention. When the first pale glow reached the frozen river, it touched the entrance tunnel, a long, low passage that forced the cold to settle before it could enter the living space. This was not a simple doorway. It was a filter. Cold air sank and stayed behind, while warmth was preserved inside. Stepping through the tunnel meant descending slightly below ground level. The change was immediate. The wind vanished. The sharp bite of the cold softened. Breath slowed. Outside, snow absorbed sound. Inside, thick earthen walls finished the work, sealing the lodge from wind and noise. At the center, the fire had burned through the night, not roaring, not wasteful. Just embers and low flame, steady and controlled, holding the space in balance. Above, a smoke hole opened to the sky, allowing heat and smoke to rise and escape at a measured pace. Below, the earth wrapped the lodge in layers of soil and snow, holding warmth like a living shell. Air moved where it was allowed. Cold remained outside. Nothing here was accidental. Light entered from the east. Cold was trapped low. Warmth stayed where people lived and slept. To an outsider, the lodge might have felt dim or enclosed. But to those who understood it, this was neither darkness nor confinement. It was protection. It was stability. It was control. In a season where a single mistake could be fatal, the Earth Lodge did not challenge winter, it mastered it. The true strength of an Earth Lodge was never meant to be seen. From the outside, it appeared low and unremarkable, barely rising above the frozen plains. But inside, the structure revealed a level of engineering shaped by generations of careful observation. At the center stood 4 massive posts, sunk deep into the soil, as solid as living trees. These pillars supported a circular ring of beams that spread weight evenly around the lodge. Nothing pressed down in one place. The load was shared, balanced, and stable even beneath tons of packed earth and snow. Over this frame, willow branches were bent and woven into a tight lattice. Prairie grasses filled the gaps, slowing air and trapping warmth. Mud and soil sealed the surface, binding the structure into a single mass. When snow fell, it did not threaten collapse. It reinforced the design, adding insulation rather than danger. By winter, the lodge no longer felt like a building. It felt like part of the land itself. Wind did not strike its walls. It slid over the rounded surface and passed on. Cold did not rush inside. It stalled at the outer layers, losing strength before it could reach the living space. Inside, heat moved slowly and predictably, held by earth and timber that released it only with time. The lodge did not resist the season. It absorbed it. This was architecture built on cooperation, not defiance. It relied on mass instead of height, gravity instead of force, patience instead of resistance. Within this shell, daily life continued without urgency. While winter reshaped the plains above, the Earth Lodge remained steady below a hidden structure designed to endure the longest nights of the year. The fire was the heart of winter life. It was never decoration, never excess. It was the center around which everything else was arranged. Meals were prepared here, slowly and deliberately. Tools were repaired in the fire's steady light. Stories were shared when the long winter night pressed close. The flame did not roar. It breathed controlled, constant, alive. Women rose early to tend the embers. Not to start a new fire, but to wake what already lived beneath the ash. A careful movement of the hand, a measured breath, and the fire returned. From storage pits dug into the earth and lined with bark and grass, dried corn, beans, and squash were brought up harvests from months earlier, preserved through planning, not luck. Nothing froze. Nothing spoiled. Children learned without being taught. They watched hands at work. They saw how hides were softened by patience and pressure. How sinew was twisted into cord. How a cracked tool was not discarded, but reshaped and given new life. Knowledge moved quietly, passed through motion rather than instruction. Inside the lodge, nothing was random. Where people slept, where food was stored, where elders sat closest to the warmth. Every placement reflected decisions refined across centuries of winter living. Space itself carried meaning, efficiency, and memory. The lodge was not cluttered. It was ordered. Not rigid, but intentional. And beyond the earthen walls, the cold never stopped. It circled. It waited. It tested. But inside, life continued steady, warm, and deliberate, held together by fire, knowledge, and a system designed to endure what winter demanded. Winter did not mean idleness. It meant precision. Men left the lodge each day to work the land even when it appeared lifeless. Traps along the riverbanks had to be checked, their locations remembered from memory alone when snow erased every visible path. Movement followed knowledge, not markers. Each step was measured. Each decision weighed against wind, light, and distance. Hunters moved across frozen ground reading signs invisible to untrained eyes. A patch of disturbed snow. Grass pressed flat by wind or weight. A sudden absence of birds where sound should exist. These were not guesses. They were a language learned over years, refined by winters that punished mistakes without mercy. Inside the lodge, work never stopped. Women repaired clothing endlessly. Because winter garments were not fashion, they were systems. Hides were layered with intention. Fur was turned inward to trap heat. Seams were angled to shed moisture and reduce wear. Every stitch mattered. Every repair extended life, not just of clothing, but of the person who depended on it. This labor was quiet, constant, and essential. Food was rationed carefully, but it was never feared. The Earth Lodge itself was part of the strategy, a stable environment that protected dried meat, corn, beans, and squash from freezing or spoilage. While the world outside tried to erase the harvest through cold and scarcity, the lodge held it steady. Nothing here relied on chance. Nothing depended on excess. This was not survival driven by desperation or luck. It was survival shaped by planning, discipline, and deep understanding. Winter was expected, accounted for, and met with design. An earth lodge rarely held only a single family. It was built for generations. Grandparents, parents, children, and infants shared the same space, especially during winter, when survival depended on closeness and continuity. Long nights created time for voices to carry knowledge forward. Elders told stories beside the fire, not as entertainment, but as instruction. Through memory and repetition, history was mapped onto living minds. Children learned who they were, where they came from, and how their people had endured winters long before this one. These lessons did not come from books. They came from voices shaped by experience. Ceremony did not pause when the land froze. Winter did not suspend meaning or belief. Inside the lodge, ritual continued in quieter forms: songs, gestures, shared meals, spoken traditions. The Earth Lodge became a place of balance, where human life aligned itself with forces that could not be controlled but could be respected. The lodge itself carried social meaning. In many plains societies, ownership passed through women. The structure belonged not to an individual, but to a lineage. Women oversaw its care, its order, and its continuity. The lodge was shelter, but it was also responsibility, a physical expression of family, inheritance, and survival across time. Nothing here was temporary. Nothing was accidental. As storms howled outside and snow buried the landscape, the village endured. No panic, no collapse, just quiet persistence. Families remained rooted beneath the surface, held together by shared space, shared memory, and shared purpose. The Earth Lodge did more than protect bodies from the cold. It protected identity. And while winter tested everything above ground, life below remained grounded, connected, and unbroken generation after generation. From the outside, an Earth Lodge looks humble, low, still, almost invisible against the winter plains. Snow settles over it, softening its outline until it blends into the land itself. To an untrained eye, it can appear unfinished, even insignificant, as if it were never meant to stand out at all. But that invisibility was not a flaw. It was the point. These homes wasted nothing. They demanded no excess materials, no constant repairs, no struggle against forces that could not be defeated. Instead of resisting the environment, they accepted its rules. Gravity was not fought, but used. Earth was not cleared away, but piled on for strength. Snow was not an enemy, but an added layer of insulation. Fire was not allowed to rage, but kept small, steady, and controlled. Every element worked together in quiet cooperation. This was architecture shaped by listening rather than dominance. The builders understood how wind moved, how heat escaped, how cold settled, how the ground held warmth long after the air had frozen. Long before modern science measured thermal mass or energy efficiency, these principles were already lived, tested, and refined through generations of winter survival. In a time when winter carried real danger, when a single mistake could mean hunger, exposure, or death, native communities of the plains chose not to conquer the land. They chose to align with it. Their homes did not rise in defiance of nature. They rested within it. And that choice raises a question that still matters today. What do we lose when we forget how to live with the earth, instead of standing above it, shaping it only to suit ourselves? Perhaps the quiet strength of the Earth Lodge is not just a lesson from the past, but a reminder waiting patiently beneath the snow of a different way forward. The Earth Lodge was never just a house. It was a lesson shaped by winter, buried beneath snow, and refined through generations of lived experience. A lesson in patience, in restraint, in knowing when not to fight the world, but to understand it. At Native Legends Uncovered, we don't tell these stories to romanticize the past or turn survival into myth. We tell them to uncover the intelligence and discipline that carried real people through real winters, when mistakes had consequences and knowledge meant life. If these forgotten designs still speak to you today, it's because they were never only about the past. There are many more stories waiting beneath the surface, quiet, grounded, and enduring. Sometimes, the deepest knowledge is the hardest to see. until the cold reminds us why it mattered.